Life must be lived forwards, but can only be understood backwards. The tyrant dies and his rule is over, the martyr dies and his rule begins. In addition to my other numerous acquaintances, I have one more intimate confidant. My depression is the most faithful mistress I have known, no wonder, then, that I return the love. Purity of heart is to will one thing. Geniuses are like thunderstorms. They go against the wind, terrify people, cleanse the air. Take away paradox from the thinker and you have a professor. People demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use. Since boredom advances and boredom is the root of all evil, no wonder, then, that the world goes backwards, that evil spreads. This can be traced back to the very beginning of the world. The gods were bored, therefore they created human beings. The thinker without a paradox is like a lover without a feeling, a paltry mediocrity. The most terrible fight is not when there is one opinion against another. The most terrible is when two men say the same thing and fight about the interpretation, and this interpretation involves a difference of quality. I begin with the principle that all men are bores. Surely no one will prove himself so great a bore as to contradict me in this. Without risk, faith is an impossibility. It is so hard to believe because it is so hard to obey. Face the facts of being what you are, for that is what changes what you are. Our life always expresses the result of our dominant thoughts. Don't forget to love yourself. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. People commonly travel the world over to see rivers and mountains, new stars, garish birds, freak fish, grotesque breeds of human. They fall into an animal stupor that gapes at existence, and they think they have seen something. At the bottom of enmity between strangers lies indifference. It belongs to the imperfection of everything human that man can only attain his desire by passing through its opposite. Boredom is the root of all evil, the despairing refusal to be oneself. What our age lacks is not reflection, but passion. Repetition is the reality and the seriousness of life. What is a poet? An unhappy person who conceals profound anguish in his heart, but whose lips are so formed that as sighs and cries pass over them they sound like beautiful music. How absurd men are! They never use the liberties they have, they demand those they do not have. They have freedom of thought, they demand freedom of speech. Faith is the highest passion in a human being. Many in every generation may not come that far, but none comes further. During the first period of a man's life, the greatest danger is not to take the risk. Concepts, like individuals, have their histories and are just as incapable of withstanding the ravages of time as are individuals. But in and through all this they retain a kind of homesickness for the scenes of their childhood. There is nothing with which every man is so afraid as getting to know how enormously much he is capable of doing and becoming. Prayer does not change God, but it changes him who prays. The self is only that which it is in the process of becoming. Once you label me, you negate me. The truth is a snare, you cannot have it without being caught. You cannot have the truth in such a way that you catch it, but only in such a way that it catches you. The commandment is that you shall love, but when you understand life and yourself, then it is as if you should not need to be commanded, because to love human beings is still the only thing worth living for. Without this life you really do not live. I divide my time as follows: half the time I sleep, the other half I dream. I never dream when I sleep, for that would be a pity, for sleeping is the highest accomplishment of genius. Life is a mystery to be lived, not a problem to be solved. Most men pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry past it. I see it all perfectly. There are two possible situations. One can either do this or that. My honest opinion and my friendly advice is this: do it or do not do it. You will regret both. Because of its tremendous solemnity, death is the light in which great passions, both good and bad, become transparent, no longer limited by outward appearances. Personality is only ripe when a man has made the truth his own. Father in heaven, when the thought of thee wakes in our hearts, let it not awaken like a frightened bird that flies about in dismay, but like a child waking from its sleep with a heavenly smile. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. The highest and most beautiful things in life are not to be heard about, nor read about, nor seen, but, if one will, are to be lived. How ironical that it is by means of speech that man can degrade himself below the level of dumb creation, for a chatterbox is truly of a lower category than a dumb creature. The more a man can forget, the greater the number of metamorphoses which his life can undergo. The more he can remember, the more divine his life becomes. Old age realizes the dreams of youth. Look at Dean Swift. In his youth he built an asylum for the insane. In his old age he was himself an inmate. A man who is a physical being is always turned toward the outside, thinking that his happiness lies outside him, finally turns inward and discovers that the source is within him. Boredom is the root of all evil, the despairing refusal to be oneself. Life has its own hidden forces which you can only discover by living. The paradox is really the pathos of intellectual life, and just as only great souls are exposed to passions, it is only the great thinker who is exposed to what I call paradoxes, which are nothing else than grandiose thoughts in embryo. Far from idleness being the root of all evil, it is rather the only true good. No time of life is so beautiful as the early days of love, when with every meeting, every glance, one fetches something new home to rejoice over. Prayer does not change God, but changes him who prays. Any truth is only true up to a certain point. When one oversteps the mark, it becomes a non-truth. Not just in commerce but in the world of ideas too, our age is putting on a veritable clearance sale. Everything can be had so dirt cheap that one begins to wonder whether in the end anyone will want to make a bid. I feel as if I were a piece in a game of chess, when my opponent says of it, that piece cannot be moved. If mankind had not embedded itself, with the momentum of centuries and the passion of habit, in the ID. When you open the door which you shut in order to pray to God, the first person you meet as you go out is your neighbor whom you shall love. Wonderful! Since my earliest childhood a barb of sorrow has lodged in my heart. As long as it stays I am ironic, if it is pulled out I shall die. Prayer does not change God, but changes him who prays. Philosophy always requires something more, requires the eternal, the true, in contrast to which even the fullest existence as such is but a happy moment. God creates out of nothing. Wonderful, you say? Yes, to be sure, but he does what is still more wonderful. He makes saints out of sinners. What a difference under the aesthetic sky! Everything is buoyant, beautiful, transient. When ethics arrives on the scene, everything becomes harsh, angular, and infinitely boring. Marriage brings one into fatal connection with custom and tradition, and traditions and customs are like the wind and weather, altogether incalculable. It seems essential, in relationships and all tasks, that we concentrate only on what is most significant and important. Patience is necessary, and one cannot reap immediately where one has sown. There are, as is known, insects that die in the moment of fertilization. So it is with all joy. Life's highest, most splendid moment of enjoyment is accompanied by death. People hardly ever make use of the freedom they have, for example, freedom of thought. Instead, they demand freedom of speech as a compensation. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, the other is to refuse to believe what is true. Far from idleness being the root of all evil, it is rather the only true good. Søren Kierkegaard. Just as in earthly life lovers long for the moment when they are able to breathe forth their love for each other, to let their souls blend in a soft whisper, so the mystic longs for the moment when in prayer he can, as it were, creep into God.